Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi just addressed the nation after hoisting the tricolour from the ramparts of the iconic Red Fort, leading the nation in India's 77th Independence Day celebrations.
Exactly. Now, the Prime Minister's address nearly lasted an hour and a half. He has addressed several issues here. The Indian Prime Minister asserted on how India's work today will define the next 1,000 years for India, emphasizing on how the decisions and sacrifices made now will impact the next 1,000 years. Of course, as of now, we can see on screen as there's several thousands of balloons, all in the tricolour, being lifted off, and we have the Indian flag being hoisted, and as it we have all these visuals coming in from the Red Fort. The Prime Minister leaves the dais, being escorted out.
These are the visuals that we're getting live from the Red Fort. As you can see, Prime Minister Narendra Modi is leaving the dais now after the address to the nation, which was followed by the national anthem and release of the balloons. The visuals that you just saw on your screens right now, there you can see Prime Minister Narendra Modi being escorted out.
स्वाधीनता दिवस समारोह अब अपने समापन की ओर बढ़ता हुआ.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi just addressed the nation on the 77th Independence Day and said that the world order is in the works, saying that India is now shaping the global order. You can see these visuals that we're getting live right now on your screens right now.
लाल किले की प्राचीर से माननीय प्रधानमंत्री.
Now the celebration saw some 30,000 visitors. Here you can see Prime Minister Narendra Modi on the screen.
राष्ट्र को संबोधित करने के पश्चात अब प्रस्थान करते हुए.
The Indian tricolours hoisted, and you can see the Indian flags all over the Red Fort. Thousands in attendance, several crores watching all across the world as the Indian Prime Minister addressed the nation for speech which lasted over an hour and a half, and he's now being escorted out, security drill being carried out. These are visuals coming right in from the Red Fort. India celebrates its 77th Independence Day, and there is a lot of celebration, a lot of fervor, and the crowd is obviously gathered in. A big G20 banner also laid out amongst all the preparations which were made at the Red Fort.
Right, Shiv, and also important to mention here, around 1,800 people from different vocations have been invited as well this time around to the Red Fort. A special guest, that's what we saw. They witnessed the speech in person. This was an initiative that was taken in line with the government's vision of Jan Bhagidari here. Some 1,800 special guests, which includes over 400 sarpanch from 660 villages, in fact, 250 from the Farmer Producer Organization scheme, 50 participants each from the Pradhan Mantri Kisan Samman Nidhi scheme.
Right.
So many firsts here as well.
Currently, we're seeing the Prime Minister's security convoy making its way out of the Red Fort after his Prime Ministerial address during 77th Independence Day for India. We see the tricolour all over the Red Fort looking beautiful, and the celebrations, of course, have started. The address has been completed. Prime Minister is making his way out now.
Of course, we'll also be taking you through the key highlights of Prime Minister Modi's speech. The Indian Prime Minister has asserted on how the world today is looking at India with hope, and India is at the forefront of shaping the global order here. Prime Minister Modi also spoke about how the youth of India is driving the country forward.
Now, the Prime Minister highlighted on how India is reshaping the global order and is becoming the voice of the global South. The speech clearly highlighted India's reform and transform message to the Indians on the occasion of India's 77th Independence Day. As of now, we're still showing you visuals from the Red Fort as the Indian Prime Minister is making his way out with his convoy, and a lot of key issues were addressed in the Prime Ministerial speech. Visuals still coming in from the Red Fort. Now, this is the Indian Prime Minister's 10th. This was the Indian Prime Minister's 10th consecutive Independence Day speech, and also the last before the upcoming general elections in 2024.
माननीय प्रधानमंत्री का काफिला बढ़ता हुआ।
Of course, as you know, the theme for the Independence Day this time is Nation First, always first. And Shivan, as you mentioned, of course, Prime Minister Modi also emphasized the motto of reform, perform and transform during his speech.
Absolutely. Now, there were 75 couples from each state and union territory in their traditional attire, which we saw in attendance.
स्कूली बच्चों और एनसीसी कैडेट से अवश्य मिलते हैं।
On your screens right now, you can see Prime Minister Modi's convoy leaving the Red Fort.
किशोरों के लिए बहुत ही प्रेरणादायी।
This year's Independence Day will culminate the Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav celebrations, which were launched by the Indian Prime Minister from Sabarmati Ashram in Ahmedabad in 2021, and it will once again usher the country into Amrit Kal with renewed vigor to realize the Prime Minister's dream of making India a developed country by 2047, which of course he also mentioned in his recent speech, which he's just concluded at the Red Fort.
Stopping on the road in front of the fort's moat, across which school children, NCC cadets have been sitting.
All right, for more on this, we're now speaking with our principal diplomatic correspondent, Siddhant Sibal, who is joining us, talking to us about the key highlights from the Prime Minister's speech. Siddhant, what can you tell us? What were the key highlights? What are the big takeaways from Prime Minister's speech? It lasted nearly an hour and a half.
So, two aspects. One is the international dimension of Prime Minister's speech, and the second, of course, is the domestic aspect of the Prime Minister's speech. I'll start with the international aspect. The Indian Prime Minister talked about rise of a new world order and how India plays an important role in it. He gave examples of the COVID crisis and how India played a role in terms of making sure that the supply chains continue. Secondly, when it comes to India being the voice of the global south, India is going to host the G20 summit next month, and there were references during Prime Minister's speech, during his address from the ramparts of the Red Fort, and how the Indian Prime Minister talked about that how India can lead the world at a time when new geopolitical equations are making. Secondly, of course, on the domestic front. On domestic front, he pointed out to the policies of his government helping out the masses. He used a specific word for the people of the country. He used the word parivarjan, that is members of the family, giving a community feeling. Secondly, of course, he gave out the ills that the country is facing, emphasizing on corruption and usage, of course, a term he specifically pointed out is parivarvad in, of course, basically in politics. But essentially, these were the key aspects. It was a long statement, but the statement of the Indian Prime Minister from the Red Fort is seen as a vision statement that lays out his plan for the country for next 1 year till the next speech he makes at from the ramparts of the Red Fort.
Right, absolutely, Siddhant. We also saw how the Prime Minister spoke about the global order. What can you tell us about that? As of now, I would also like to draw your attention to the screen, the visuals that are coming in from the Red Fort right now. There you can see the Prime Minister. Now, Siddhant, let's also talk about the reform, perform and transform motto that the Prime Minister has emphasized on. What can you tell us about that?
Well, when it comes to the statement made by the Indian Prime Minister from the ramparts of the Red Fort, he uses this statement to lay out his vision. And when it comes to reform, this is something that has been part and parcel of the Modi government, whether it's the laws, he mentioned about that during his statement, or whether it is the reforms in the army, in the military as well. We know that Agniveer is something that is one of the key flagship program when it comes to the Indian government's policies regarding reforms in the army. Now, perform and transform is something that is essentially because of the reforms taken by the Indian government. This government is known for its reforms. We have seen just in the monsoon session, number of bills were introduced, whether it's data, whether it is focusing on laws as well, changing the basic focus when it comes to laws like the Criminal Procedure Code. But essentially, when it comes to his focus area during his speech, he focused as to how India by 2047, when India celebrates 100 years of its Independence Day, Independence Year celebrations. It is one of the leading powers in the global, and how it is a country that plays an important role in the global economic order as well. He pointed as to how India today is the 5th largest economy, and how the focus is to make sure that it is one of the top 3 economies in the world very soon.
Right, Siddhant. Prime Minister Narendra Modi addressed the nation from the ramparts of the Red Fort. Of course, he said that India has entered an age of prosperity, of Amrit Kal, and stressed on the combined power of democracy, demography and diversity. Now, big statement there. What can you tell us about that? This trifecta of democracy, demography and diversity.
Well, 3D, something that Indian Prime Minister has been emphasizing in the past as well when it comes to his speech. What is interesting to note that he started his speech by pointing out that how India is the most populous country. This is now well known. UN data has also shown that. And India is also one of the youngest nations in the world with a substantial portion of the population below 30 years. So that gives India a demographic edge at a time when there are several parts and several countries in the world who are, of course, aging. So India is a young society, and India can give the workforce for the future, the workforce for the world. And we have seen how India has been signing number of mobility pacts in the past with many countries that helps illegal migration. The Indian External Affairs Minister has been pointing out to that. Now, when it comes to democracy, India is a very proud country when it comes to democracy. And as the Indian Prime Minister has several times pointed out that how India is the mother of all democracy. And we also know that India has a history of also having the republics of Vaishali, which is one of the oldest democracies in the world. In fact, the Indian Prime Minister travels to Greece next week, and we could hear a common focus by both Greece and India when it comes to democracy. Greece being a country from where the Western ideas and the Western democracy started. So essentially, these were the focus areas, but every point, every bit, every word and every sentence will be dissected in next 24 hours as to what the Indian Prime Minister has laid out his vision for India, and of course the world as well, where India stands in the world and the global order.
Right, absolutely. Well, Siddhant, thank you so much for bringing us the key highlights from Prime Minister Narendra Modi's speech.